I'm CK. Tonight we're going to build a mini synthesizer. I was so impressed by the Division-6 sequencer I built the other day, link in the description, that I bought their dual mini synthesizer kit. 2 all-in-one synthesizers in one, I'd probably say, well, I'm not going to guess, I'll measure it, one eurorack module. Looks like it's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully it'll sound really interesting too. Hope you enjoy it. So here's the kit. Dual mini synthesizer from Division-6. I bought this directly from them this time, and they fulfilled pretty quickly. Oh, and besides the synthesizer itself, I also got the MIDI expander for it, so we can control it from MIDI also. So I may want to, if it sounds really good, I may use it with my Logic rig through MIDI as well as through eurorack style CV. So we'll see what's up. Let's take a look inside. It looks like there's quite a bit in this bag. And of course there's going to be build documentation online. Their last build guide was really good, so I'm looking forward to this build guide being really good also. Go ahead and get my, let me go ahead and get my scissors. Here's the front panel, tuning shape from a square wave to a triangle wave to LFO1, LFO2, mixer of the LFOs, fine tune, glide or portamento, however you want to call it, attack, release, filter, I'm not sure what that'll be, sample and hold, gate, and then another attack release, another shape, rate for the LFOs. Again, it looks like it's got rate, glide, CV, and gate, and of course it's duplicated the same way on the bottom. So there are 2 interesting little synthesizers here. Here's the circuit board, excuse me, and as you can see, lots of switches and control knobs. And on the back, okay, this is not going to be that complicated a build. There are a few resistors. Again, values not marked. Some capacitors, the power connector, and then 2 PIC 16F1718 microcontrollers. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Microcontrollers, so that's synthesizer 1, that's synthesizer 2, and then some connectors to reprogram it, I assume. So it's not electronically that challenging a build. It's going to be just fun to put all those knobs and switches on. So again, it's almost pure digital. That's interesting. I thought it'd have a little bit more analog components, particularly on the filters. So we'll see. Let's get the parts bag open. A thing. I'm going to put all the ICs in here. Some pin headers. Oh, that must be for programming it. So yeah, here are 2 programmed ICs, and in silver marking pen, it's got Division-6, and SYN periods for synthesizer. So these are the synthesizers. Then let me get my rectangular parts bin. And we'll dump all this stuff out. Some screws, panel mount screws to put it in your rack. Electronic components including LEDs, and again, like they did on the sequencer, they're using these spacers under the LEDs, and I like that quite a bit. That made it, the height of the LEDs was very uniform, and it actually was easier to get them through the front panel with the spacers. Dumping stuff out into this bin for the electronic stuff, and again, and I do appreciate this, they don't have little plastic bags for all the components, which is a waste in my opinion. And what they do instead is, this is some lavender painter's tape, 7-day tape, whatever you want to call it, and they just capture the leads in that, so everything's handy, you can see everything, but you're not throwing out a bunch of plastic. A few electrolytics, 2 disc caps, they're probably hundreds. Yeah, these are 104s. 2 small disc caps, what are those, 103s? No, 102s. LEDs, 1 diode, a bunch of resistors, and 1, I think that's a power transistor, voltage regulator, but we'll see. And again, they're such iconoclasts, they have a blue stripe on their power cable, not a red one. Rebels. And here's all the knobs and switches and jacks. So it's going to be an interesting little kit, not too challenging to assemble, so we may speed through a bunch of the electronic assembly, and obviously we're going to speed through a bunch of the switch assembly. Oh, let me do my again, just like their mini sequencer, it's a nice blue circuit board. The plating is through hole, which again I always appreciate. So I'm going to pull the build guide up. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't go through the stuff in the bag. What am I doing here? We have a bill of materials. Yeah, that's a voltage regulator. Which is nice. And hex standoff. I don't. Oh, there it is. They show it as brass, but it's actually silver tone. Are there 2 of them? Yeah, there are 2 of them. And one thing, I'm going to say it again, because it was true the last time too, and it's particularly challenging for the resistors. Get a new printer, guys. The color fidelity on these is not very good, so if you're relatively new to electronics and you don't have color codes memorized, don't go by the color here. If it says 1K, then either check it on a meter or look up the color code for a 1K resistor on some online resource or whatever and find it yourself. Do not rely on the colors here, because they're not very, the fidelity of the colors is pretty bad. Okay, I'm going to heat up the soldering iron and get the build guide, and we'll dive in. And I apologize, I forgot 2 things. First, Comes with a sticker, goes on my sticker wall, and here's the mini sequencer MIDI expander. Again, a pretty small board. With 2 data cables, pin headers, and basically it's just moving MIDI from this connector to the main board. So not much to that. I don't even know if I'll record putting this together. And this is, so the 2 pin headers here, I believe that this is not for programming them. I believe that's to send the MIDI signals in, even though, no, it's right, for sending the MIDI signals in. Again, it's a very simple kit, so we'll see it in the rack when we're done, but I'm not going to record assembly of that. And for this kit, similar to the mini sequencer, it's big enough that I'm going to use PCB holder instead of putting it on my solder buddy. So what I'm doing right now is I'm looking at the placement of these resistors and seeing how one thing, again, the other thing that I am not necessarily 100% in sync on, next to C6, is while they do have polarity protection with this diode, they only have one, and I'm assuming that's because they're not pulling, I think they're only pulling from the 12 volt positive. I don't think they're pulling from the 12 volt negative, so they wouldn't need 2 diodes, but that's where the diode will go. Because this is relatively straightforward, I'm going to put it together without commentary, just with sped up video. And as I like to do for that, I will be listening to WQXR classical music out of New York City on the WQXR app. I find WQXR to be the best classical music station in the world, and I've listened to them all, and I've been listening to WQXR almost all my life. And tonight we're going to start with the orchestral suite in F major by Christopher Graupner. So enjoy watching a fast video build. I wanted to come back. We're not completely done with the electronics, but I wanted to come back and talk a little bit about the LEDs. If you haven't seen my video of the sequencer build from Division-6, I want to highlight this because these are really good. I mentioned them in the intro, but these spacers are not simply cut tubing, but they're designed for LEDs. Nice opening there, and here at the top there are 2 openings for the leads of the LED, so it's easy to get them in, and they space very well on the board. so when you're putting the front panel on, they'll drop in just the right place. So, oops, let me clank around a little bit. And as usual, Division-6 says, we recommend putting these colors in these positions. If you don't want to, put them wherever you want, which is a nice attitude to have. They fit in just like that. And of course, polarity matters. And these are sticking in pretty well, which is nice. What's the next color? Yellow. All the electronic components are on the board. Again, not too particularly interesting. A bunch of resistors, a couple of capacitors here and there, and the socketry. Now, the next part, which is putting all the switches and jacks on. Again, we'll go into fast motion for this because there's not a whole lot interesting in putting a whole bunch of jacks and knobs on. Going back live for a minute, the bottom row of jacks for Synthesizer 2 has a little bit of a problem. The solder points for the resistors on the back of the board impinge on the square where the jacks go, so I can't get them completely flush. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flush cut down to the board. So basically cut off the solder ball. Hopefully, if I look at the resistors themselves, and again, this is why boards that are made with plating completely through hole are so important. I can see that the solder has made it through to all the way down in the hole, so I'm not worried about the security of the pins. I didn't solder those two switch points. I'll have to do that. So I'm not worried about the resistors coming loose or losing electrical conductivity, but just something to keep in mind. These pads have got to come off if the jacks are going to be flush to the board. It's not a problem on these, on the Synthesizer 1 ones, because these are for the IC sockets, and it's not a problem there. And those resistors are, I didn't have any issues with them. It's just these down here, I'm not sure why. So that's what you'll be seeing, and the other thing we'll be doing, he doesn't mention putting these pin headers on, which will go right here. So I'm going to put them on. I bet he doesn't mention them because most people don't get the MIDI expander kit to go with this, even though the MIDI expander kit contains its own set of pin headers. But yeah, on the main synth, I'm just double checking. He does not mention putting these on the board, and that would be sad if you didn't notice that before you got done and you got the front panel all on and you didn't have these on. So I'm going to solder these on right now. At this point, I'm going to put the standoffs up at the top also, because this is the last time I want to put this front panel on, because it's getting to be a pain. So we'll just put these on now, get it out of the way. If you're wondering why I'm not standing this up vertically, it's because that bottom row of jacks is not soldered in yet, and they'd all fall out. And that would be bad. So here's the top screw for the top of the standoff. And here's the front panel. Sure doesn't give you much threads there, but fine. Oh, by the way, I haven't pointed this out. This front panel is not aluminum like most of them are. It's fiber, like circuit board material. Okay, so this is the final time I'm going to put this darn front panel on top of, what is it? 24 pots and 26 jacks and 4 switches and 8 LEDs. It's a lot of things to get lined up into these holes. So this is the last time I'm going to be doing that. In fact, I'm going to drop a couple of screws onto these jacks so I don't have to use the tweezers anymore. Oops. Oh, one other thing. This is just a bunch of soldering, of course, but there are 2 areas, like around this cap and the socket, that's a little hard to get into, and around this cap is a little hard to get into also. Not a huge deal, but just something to be prepared for. Now, as I'm doing the final assembly of the board, it's not, I mean, there's a panel to the board, even though I haven't soldered these jacks yet. I have tightened down 2 of the panel nuts here in the middle, and that, let me see if I can show you. What's happening here is, as usual, whenever you do eurorack, you always have one component type, or one component that drives the height between the circuit board and the front panel. And in this case, it's these jacks is driving the height. And even though they're, I'm going to look up in the sky for this, even though they're flat on the circuit board, they're still, with them as flat as they can be, the LEDs are a little bit recessed, and to put these black screws in the standoffs and get any amount of thread on them at all, you actually have to bend the front panel a little bit. So it's only like a 32nd of an inch, but it's a little additional stress on the panel. So I'll just go ahead and solder the rest of these jacks and put 24 more panel nuts on, and then we'll be ready to put power to this thing. And there she is. Knobs all move well, switches are still okay. Make sure these standoff screws are as tight as I can make them. So not much electronic build, but a whole lot of soldering of all these pots and jacks. Now let's put it in the rack and hear how it sounds. Alright, so we're in the rack. We're going to be using the Befaco MIDI thing and the Routemaster power supply from Frequency Central, and that's it. I'm not going to be using any of the other rack units. We're just trying the synth on its own with the little MIDI keyboard on the second shelf and the pile amp driving the speaker. So let me focus in on the synth. And there's the synth. Now I have not powered this up yet, so this is going to be a surprise for all of us. So smoke test. Now I've had to tweak this a little bit after I powered it up because I was not reading certain things right. So let's hear initially how it sounds. This is with a saw wave. And now we'll swing that back around to a square wave. And we'll put a little filter in it, which I don't hear any difference with. Add some portamento, which creates a kind of a zipper effect. And that's what I think he means when he talks about 8-bit goodness in there, because the steps are pretty coarse. Take the glide all the way back out. Let's do sample and hold. And we could probably trigger that better with the sequencer. I may do that in a minute or two. Now, the mistake that I made, and the reason why I was getting a bunch of doubled notes or ascending or descending notes, is the LFO for VCO and LFO for VCA to be off, they have to be in the 12 o'clock position. I, in my common usage, thought off would be all the way counterclockwise. That's not the case. So you have to get those in dead center pretty much, and then you can play melodically. Now the next thing we're going to do, or I'm going to do here, is I'm going to put this through, put the Division-6 sequencer in here, use the CV and gate from the sequencer, and see how they sound together. Here we go. They don't sound at all because I don't have the other end of the gate cable plugged in, or have it plugged into the ADSR. There we go. Now that'll be better. So that sounds pretty good. And again, I haven't done anything plugging additional parameters in to the other inputs, but it sounds good. It's a nice little unit. Again, not a lot of electronics to do, since almost all this is in the two microcontrollers, but it fits into the rack well. It plays well with the dual mini sequencer, so I think it's another keeper from Division-6. Thanks for watching.